Good morning, and welcome back to SteelCast number 7. I am your host, Trenton of the famous Purgatory Ironworks here in South Georgia, where it is hot, steamy butt cracks all the way around. But butt cracks are the least of our worries today because we got some education to lay down. And last week, I went hard in the paint about people that, wanted to make the difference between, well, you're not a traditional blacksmith because we have power hammers before Christ. It's traditional. But along those veins, I want to talk a little bit about tooling. And I feel like sometimes that I kind of contradict myself, or what's the old saying, I'm talking out of both sides of my face. Because on one hand, I will say when somebody asks me, hey, I'm starting blacksmithing, what tools do I need? Man, it's kind of a loaded question. And I always frame it as like, well, it's a bad question. Let's go at it from a different angle. You need to tell me what you want to make, because what you want to make tells you what tools that you need. And I made this example. If I did it last week and I'm repeating myself, forgive me. But, you guys need to hear this. If I'm at a show and somebody comes up and they say, hey, I'm getting into blacksmithing, it is, I have to click into a general mode if I'm just kind of giving them the highlights. But if I'm really going to be effective with them, I have to have them tell me what they want to make. Because here's the deal. Say, hey, I'm blacksmithing. What tools do I need? Man, I'm about to list off every tool in my shop. And you need all of it. All the tools, and we need more. But if you say, hey, I'm looking to make one of those S-hooks like you have on the table, well, now that's a lot different, because I'm going to tell you, well, you're going to have your anvil, hammer, fire. You're going to need a vise or a bending tool of some sort. And you're going to need either the horn of the anvil or, preferably, if you're doing a bunch of them, a specially sized hardy tool, right? I mean, boom, 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 punch list right there. And it's the same thing with any of the hardware. I can give you the exact specifics and alternatives to those specifics if you tell me what you're looking to make. But if you say, hey, I just want to do blacksmithing, well, man, I don't have enough room in my shop for everything that you need to do blacksmithing with, right? So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to break this down into just a couple different categories. I'm going to try to keep this as concise as possible. I'm not going to get into a lot of the procurement or the building of, because those are always options. But starting out, whether you're going to be the guy that forges, well, let's just say that first category is going to be forging, because if you're going to be forging hardware as a reenactor, if you're going to be forging knife blades, these two overlap. But of course, you can be a very competent knife maker and never touch a forge. So let's just kind of stay in the forging end. So the basic tools that you're going to need to have to get started into forging is going to be an anvil of some sort, a heat source, a hammer, and a way to hold the steel. Now, the great news is, off the shelf, a pair of vice grips is probably the most useful pair of tongs you will ever own. Later on, if you get a welding machine, you can modify vice grips, and that is something that we still use regularly in the shop, especially when we're working a gas forge, right? A hammer, going to be super simple. Man, if you go down to your local pawn shop, there's going to be more ball peen hammers than you can shake a stick at. And a good 1 pound ball peen hammer probably has been responsible for more beginner's forge work than anything else in history. You can go look for the cross peen hammers. I mean, they're out there, but man, especially back when I was getting started, the ball peen hammer was the way to go. In fact, even in Andersonville, when I was there with Jay had an entire collection of ball peen hammers that had been modified for doing blacksmithing work. I mean, he had, especially for texturing. In fact, I still use one of Jay's hammers in the shop that's had the ball flattened to make a wider ding, and it was his texturing hammer. So, again, there you go. You're covered. So the real issue comes around when it comes to the anvil and the heat source. Now, thankfully, these days, a heat source is easier to come by than ever, because back in the day, The only real gas forges that you had were from the farrier side of things, and these were the NC tool type forges. I mean, understand, it has only been really because of Forged in Fire that suddenly you have Mr. Volcano, you have all the knockoffs. I mean, you can purchase a forge for under $100 at this point, and that was just absolutely not the case back in the day. So, I mean, even if you're going to buy your way into this, and now I think Harbor Freight has a couple of the cast steel anvils as opposed to the cast iron ones. I think is that Central Machinery. Don't quote me on that, but there's a lot of guys that have been. There are some Russian anvils that have come over that are steel and are very serviceable. So you can go out and just power play, drop $250 and have everything that you need to effectively start hammering on steel. Understand how, all right, watch this. We're going in the weeds just a little bit, just a little. Because back in the day, finding an anvil was a problem. They were not for sale because nobody really knew what they were anymore. They were barn finds. They were stuff that was buried out on the farm. And again, very difficult. You couldn't find them to buy. And that's where the railroad track anvils came through. But I'm going to tell you something. It's, as many railroad track anvils out there, it was very tough to find railroad track. I mean, it was on the side of the road, but it was in a 20-foot chunk. And if you grabbed it, you were stealing, and you still need a hell of a cutting torch. So even they were very difficult to come by. There was not a railroad track anvil store. But my goodness, there was the people that were determined had them. And then, of course, there was the absolutely ubiquitous brake drum forge. And a lot of that information got out there because of BANA and the early blacksmithing groups. I mean, in the 80s, that was the thing to have. If you're just the average Joe, you don't have access to a fabrication shop. But even the brake drum forge, man, there was a lot of doing there, right? There was a lot of doing there. So just to understand that today you have the incredible option to basically buy your way into blacksmithing, no problem. Now, that's going to get you started. That's going to get you hammering steel. And then what's going to happen is as you progress, you're going to have to make some decisions about what you're going to be making. And that really should direct what tools that you're getting. At least have a game plan. Now, for some of us, if you're not that into it, what'll end up happening is you'll be hanging out with the guys. You'll be in somebody's shop and they say, hey, by the way, I have this widget I don't need anymore. Do you want to buy it? And suddenly you're like, I don't know why, but yes, I would love to buy this. And suddenly you have tools for doing sheet metal work. And then suddenly, because you've now got the tooling, now you're making roses. You're trying to make, crotch armor. I mean, now you're working sheet metal. And that's usually how it happens for a lot of us. In fact, Clyde Payton, the legendary Clyde Payton, who's down there around Tallahassee, I managed to get Mr. Clyde's Pexto stakes, which is for sheet metal. Now I started in armor back in the day, but, I really didn't have a good set of stakes, and, now I do. And so I do a lot more sheet metal work than I did in the past simply because I have the right tooling. And I think that you're going to find that this is where you're going to be. That either if you're directing after the work, then you'll know what tools to look for. And again, because of the way Facebook is, you can easily find those tools to buy. But if you're just kind of perusing and cruising, what'll end up happening, you'll be at a yard sale somewhere. You will see a particular tool for stuff you may or may not have been interested in. You're like, yeah, I need to buy this. And then suddenly you're doing new work. We're only 10 minutes in, so I'm gonna jump off on this on what you should be after as a blacksmith, and I'm gonna have to make a case for this because I get a lot of pushback on this. And here's the irony: I was the guy that used to give the pushback. If you are getting serious about blacksmithing, if you really want to explore what you can do in metal, there is absolutely no more important goal than a power hammer. Now, for most people, that's going to be a tire hammer. Raymond Head, of course, Clay Spencer is the gentleman that started a lot of that stuff. Raymond Head does a lot of that work now. Can't remember how many thousands of hammers he's done at this point. John Perilou out in Louisiana actually has power hammer classes. So these things are out there, but I'm going to tell you, boys and girls, I cannot understate how important a power hammer is. And I've mentioned this before, because when you have a power hammer, you no longer have to fight the material. So let's say you're going to get out there. This is great. This is one of those cases of ask me how I know, right? So, I'm hanging out, on the plantation when I was a kid, and, there's a junk car over there, and man, there's this entire rack of leaf springs. I'm like, holy crap, leaf springs are great material for knife blades. Well, I'm just going to get this leaf spring here, and I'm going to beat it into some knives. Now, the problem is, most passenger vehicle springs are going to be a half-inch thick, usually a little bit more than a half-inch, even on a passenger car. And even though you have these great plans to get out there and take this half-inch by 3-inch steel and bump it in, and beat it into a knife blade that's 1/8 of an inch thick, I mean, you have grand plans, but after about 5 minutes, you start looking like a stroke victim because your arm's curling up, right? Because you simply do not have the muscle power to convert that much steel that quickly. You just don't. I found that out when I decided I was going to do a railroad spike knife demonstration in the space of 15 minutes. I'm going to tell you, brother, trying to beat a railroad spike knife into a blade in 15 minutes while demonstrating in front of a crowd, your arm's going to fall off. The point is what's happening here is that suddenly you are fighting the material, that you are reaching the physical limits of your body, and now you are more concerned in your mind with the physical end of it than you are with the creative aspect of it. See what I'm saying? When you get a power hammer, you take that load off of your body, that your mind can be solely focused on the work and not the pain. When you really start getting into blacksmith, you start working up that ramp, up that ladder of progression, you're going to find out that tooling is everything. My God, I have boxes of tools that I have made for the power hammer. The power hammer is really just the start. It takes the work out of doing stuff. But when you start producing, being able to have a tool or insert that gives you a precise forging on that end so you can go to the next level is absolutely critical. Great example. If you guys haven't seen, I'll see if I can't find a picture and I'll pop it up here for you guys. There was a ladies blacksmiths group, and I think Payne and Chasen put that on. God bless her. Was such an awesome lady. And they had a contest, and you were supposed to make angel wings. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do this. And I went out and I was going to do like a little sculpture, but then I was like, well, we're just going to go balls out, boys and girls, because I had a bunch of leftover peanut blades. And if you guys aren't familiar, peanut blades are these agricultural blades that are about 40 inches long, about a half-inch thick, about 7 inches wide. And for those of you who are not familiar with peanuts, peanuts grow underground. So there's a bush that's about 1 foot high, and then the peanuts are on the roots. Well, these blades actually run under the plant and they cut the root system. There's got a big taproot. They cut that root system loose so that the bush can be picked up and the dirt shaken off of it. So these blades run through the soil and they dull, and we have a large business remanufacturing those blades. But they become too worn. There's some sort of defect with them and they can't be used again. So we have a big scrap pile. So on my power hammer, like most standard power hammers, they have a combination die. So that means I've got a flat side and I've got a side that's got 2 rounds, which is basically a fullering side. I heated up some of these blades and I just used that fullering side to pound on the edge, which caused that blade to curve like a feather. So I ended up making this 10-foot wide set of wings that, of course, I could conveniently stand in front of. So I was like the Iron Angel. It was very narcissistic. And it was super awesome. But guys, I think I ended up doing, there's like 20 or 30 blades in that sculpture. This is half-inch material. There is no way on God's green earth I would have ever got through hammering one of those had it not been for the power hammer. But because I had that thing, I was able to make this incredible sculpture in an afternoon. And I was able to apply my creativity where if I had done it by hand, one blade in, I would be like, screw this, it is time for sweet tea. So as you are getting into this, if you're going to be doing forging, even as a knife maker, a power hammer is going to be your first stop. Now, again, that's going to be a $3 or $4 grand investment, but it is worth it if you're going to be doing the forging stuff. Now, in conjunction with that, I'm going to give you the second milestone, and these aren't a progression as much as you need both of these. My shop would die if I didn't have both of these in the shop with me, and that's going to be a 2x72 grinder. In fact, I have 4 2x72 grinders in the shop, and you're going to find that any place that actually does proper work is going to have a similar setup. I was very Steve Schwartzer, and again, I really need to do a podcast just about these names that you need to know. Steve Schwartzer is a legend. He is arguably he is currently the absolute godfather of, as far as reputation, I mean legendary when it comes to knife making in the United States. And I went to see Steve in his shop. He was very gracious to host us. And Steve's got 5 or 6, sanders set up because as you're working a lot of knives, you don't want to have to change a belt. So you just buy a $3,000 sander for each grit of belt so you can walk right down. I mean, it seems preposterous when you're a beginner, but you're going to find out that's how it works. He had some awesome presses. He had, power hammers. But that 2x72 sander is not only critical for knife making, which again, if you don't have that, you're not going to do a whole lot of knives. But it's also critical for a lot of blacksmithing because in the blacksmith shop of antiquity, understand that the grinding stone was a necessity. For cleaning up pieces, for cleaning up edges that you had cut. I mean, it was absolutely critical. And the 2x72 grinder has replaced that. I don't care if I haven't made a knife in a year, that 2x72 with a 36 grit belt is turned on multiple times during the day when I'm doing hardware. So, but again, that's another $3,000 investment. But when you have both your power hammer and your grinder, you are on your way. You now have the 2 most powerful modern assets that you can have. Now, again, it is a lot of money. There's no 2 ways about it. But if you're climbing that ladder, that's where you want to go. So, folks, I have burnt up almost 20 freaking minutes talking about tools and power hammers. And, yeah. I hope you guys got something out of it. I'm trying to give everybody kind of an overview from somebody who's a professional because, not everybody's going to be pushing that hard. Certainly not everybody has that kind of money to drop on a particular hobby. But, I'm trying to make sure that you're seeing it from the perspective of a professional because it is the purpose of our organizations to create the professional. Now, I mean, that's the ideal. Now, we're not always going to get there. In fact, we're rarely going to be able to create a lot of those professionals. But the fact is, that's the goal. And somewhere along there, we're going to be able to make a lot of amateurs. We're going to be able to make a lot of people that are competent. And hopefully, somewhere out there, we're going to be able to make a few professionals. But if you don't know what the progression is, then I'm not doing you any good. So, no, most of you are not going to end up like I am with $20,000 of sanders and hammers in the shop. By the way, that you know what the bad thing is? I say $20,000. That's like less. That's a used hammer. I'm being cheap, right? But most of you are never going to get there. But here's the thing, because I can tell you that's what you need to really do the fun work. That's when you go find a buddy that has all that stuff, right? So, anyway, Guys, that's going to wrap it up for me today. Of course, I am your host, Trenton here with Purgatory Ironworks. We're going to be back next week with yet another SteelCast. And please, please, please do the like, subscribe, and comment. And you guys know, if you put it in the comments, I'll try to give it about 3 or 4 days, and I answer the comments personally. So take the time. Thank you guys for listening, all that kind of good stuff. And I will see you guys later.